Part 1.
First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Good morning, Santon Sports Club.
Oh, hello. I spoke to one of your colleagues last week about becoming a member of your club, and I'd like to go ahead and join. If I can do it over the phone.
Absolutely. I'll start by taking a few details, if I may.
Of course.
What's your name?
It's Alex Coos.
Can you spell your surname?
It's C-O-O-Z-E.
Lovely, I've got that. And are you a student or in employment?
Employed.
Thank you. And can I ask, what's your job?
I'm a doctor.
Right, thanks. Now, we don't need to get your full address at this stage, but could I just take your postcode?
If I can remember it. I've only just moved. Oh, yes, it's GT1.
Right.
And then 2BN.
Is that VN?
No, BN.
Sorry. Now, one last question in this section. Can I just ask how you heard about us? Was it from a friend?
Actually, I read about the club in a newspaper.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
Now, we do offer different types of membership according to which facilities you want to use and when.
Yes, I gathered that, but my schedule's a bit problematic. I mainly want to use the gym, and that'll be after about 7 p.m. when I finish work.
Fine, right. And will you be interested in swimming?
I understand you have both an indoor and an outdoor pool?
That's right.
I'm not a fan of swimming, actually, and certainly don't want to be there when it gets very packed in the evenings. I think I'd only want to use the outdoor one and during the day, when I can get a bit of sunbathing in.
And when the children are at school, of course, so it's a bit quieter. A lot of our clients prefer that.
I can imagine. And I might occasionally want to have a game of badminton. And I suppose I'd like to book courts on Saturdays and Sundays when I can organise a game with friends.
Right. And would you be wanting to use our other club facilities, such as the sauna, steam room or tanning bed? They're open all day until 9 p.m.
Well, I think I'd only want to use the steam room, and probably after I've been doing heavy exercise.
So, shall I put that down as evenings?
Sorry, no, I'd probably only use it on Saturdays, and the occasional Sunday, when I have more time to relax.
That is the end of Part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 2. Part 2.
You will hear a recording of a radio news magazine discussing the importance of doing good in the community. Now listen carefully to the interview and answer questions 11 to 16.
Hello, I'm Emma Robertson, and I'd like to welcome our listeners to Beyond the Lens, the programme that aims to dig deeper on issues in culture and society. Today we have Professor Hudson McMahon from the University of Bristol's Department of Social Policy. Hello, Professor McMahon. Do you want to tell us a little about what you'll be presenting today?
Of course, Emma. But first, I'd like to thank you for having me on the show. My wife and I are both avid listeners of Beyond the Lens, and it's a bit of a thrill to be on the show. But I digress. Today, I want to talk about the importance of doing good in the community and in society. There are many ways of doing this, but the two most common ways are volunteering and giving to charity. However, these methods of improving community and society have an important difference. While volunteering one's time is almost always a positive for society, giving to charity is significantly more problematic.
Problematic, Professor McMahon? It would seem to me that giving to charity is always a positive for society. We celebrate those among us who are the greatest donors to charity.
Yes, and in general, it is warranted. I do want to clarify. In general, giving to charity is good, but one must be very careful for two reasons. First, some charities do not do sufficient amounts of charitable good per pound. And second, some charities receive too much money that could be spent better on other causes. Let me discuss each of these in turn.
This seems to me a rather radical thesis.
It seems that way, but I hope to convince you otherwise by the end of the program. Now, getting back to charities. Some charities simply do not give a lot of their received monies to the actual performance of good acts. For instance, some charities utilize less than 10% of their donations on actual charitable activities. The rest goes to salaries, promotion, and other overhead costs. So for a donation of £100, it may be the case that less than £10 actually goes to helping someone.
That sounds terrible, but it still helps people, right?
Well, yes, but as charitable givers, we should try and reward those charities who do most good with the least amount of money. By that I mean that those thinking of donating to charity should do research on a charity before giving to the cause. There are other charities where more than 50% of donations go to the end cause. These charities are much more deserving of your patronage.
You now have some time to look at questions 17 to 20.
Another reason to be discerning when it comes to your choice of charities is what I call the relative utility of a charitable donation.
Let me take a guess here, Professor McMahon. Is the relative utility of a donation how much good it does relative to other donations?
That's just about it, Emma. The relative utility of a donation is how much good a donation does per amount spent. For instance, the disease MND, motor neuron disease, was in the news in recent years, and MND charities received a windfall of donations. This sounds all well and good, but there is a problem. Unlike, say, heart disease, MND does not affect very many people. While it would be wonderful to cure the disease, there are better allocations of our limited charity funds.
Wait, so you're saying it was bad for people to give to MND charities?
Not quite, only that it was suboptimal. Because there is limited supply of money given to charity each year, it is important that it is used at least somewhat optimally. And allocating overwhelming amounts of money to a disease that affects very low percentage of people is extremely suboptimal.
That's very interesting, Professor McMahon. So how can our listeners try and optimise their charitable gifts?
First of all, don't be caught up in viral social media campaigns. Instead, use such moments to remind yourself of the importance of giving to charity in general, and not just to niche causes with good promotion. And second, do your research. Before you donate, look up how much of a charity's donation go to the actual end goal. Additionally, look up how many people are affected by the charity's end cause. The more people there are affected, and the worse they are affected, the more likely you should be to donate to that cause. It is all about maximizing good in the world.
That certainly sounds like a noble goal, but if everyone donates...
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3. Part 3.
You will hear two science lecturers discussing space exploration. First, you have some time to look at questions
Hello, John. How was your conference on space travel?
Hi, Susan. It was great. We heard some fascinating speakers, especially one fellow who was an expert on Mars. He thinks it's quite feasible for humans to live there in the near future.
Well, if we spent the billions of dollars that go into space research on looking after our own planet, then perhaps we wouldn't need to worry about the Earth being uninhabitable in 100 years' time. Nor would we need to look for another planet to colonise.
Yes, but there are some important things that space exploration can teach us, you know, especially about the history of our own planet and its atmosphere. That sort of knowledge could help us solve some of the problems that threaten our planet.
Still, I don't really see why they have to send astronauts into space. Robotics is so much more advanced now. Why can't they simply send robots?
Well, robotics has come a long way, and it is more expensive to send a manned spaceship into orbit. But the biggest problem with robots is that they have to be programmed for every possible eventuality.
Yes, I suppose you're right. Robots just can't react to situations independently the way that humans do. They still need us to tell them what to do.
That's right. Robots may have come a long way, but if you're going to go to all the expense of building one, you really need to make sure it's going to work when it gets there, and they don't tend to take risks with new and untested technology. What if it lets you down? So instead, a lot of the space technology nowadays is actually based on the technology they used in the 1970s, because we know that it works and it's reliable.
So, do you think it will ever be possible to send robots to Mars?
I'm not sure. One of the speakers spoke about that, and he says that communication would be a problem.
Is that because of the conditions? I mean, those extremes of temperature, and even the atmosphere itself, would probably create an awful lot of interference.
Yes, but they're both issues that can be dealt with. Now, the real problem is simply how far away it is. That would cause long delays before the robots received any messages about what to do next. So, for the moment, they don't think it's feasible.
That makes sense.
Now listen and answer questions
Tell me, do you really think we should be contemplating sending humans to Mars at all? Don't you think we should wait until we do have the technology?
Well, many years ago, the civilizations that built the pyramids or that began building enormous cathedrals must have started the project never expecting to see it finished. I think we should take the same approach and start our preparations now.
That's an interesting point, though I'm still not convinced. Surely you don't foresee a time when humans will be living on Mars? That's just science fiction, isn't it?
Not at all. I think there is a distinct possibility that humans will live there.
But what about the conditions there? Even the dirt on the ground could kill us.
Yes, I agree with you there, but we can easily build a self-contained structure there so people don't need to go outside.
I suppose the ground does also contain a lot of resources, so getting metals wouldn't be a problem.
That's right. A lot of building materials could be found there, but there are still many risks involved.
Yes, what about radiation? I don't think there will ever be a way to shield us totally from cosmic radiation, even inside a spaceship.
I can't agree with you there. Astronauts have been travelling in space for a long time now, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem for us.
I just don't think we have enough experience of living in space long term.
But you have to accept that it is within the realms of possibility that one day there will be a Martian space station.
Well, I have every faith in science, and Mars does seem to be the next frontier. So, yes, I imagine we will eventually send a space mission there. But I can't see people living there.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Welcome to this series of lectures on interpreting contemporary art. This morning, I'd like to look at the whole issue of contemporary art. What it is, how do we interpret it, what are its uses, and does art, in effect, have any advantages or disadvantages for society? I think at this point it's important for me to clarify that I am looking at art from two main perspectives. Firstly, art as something made by and appreciated by individuals, and secondly, art's relationship with society, as it is society that supports, protects, and encourages art. And I'm hoping that this lecture will act as a springboard for you to revisit your own artistic experiences and question your own ideas of what contemporary art means. Throughout this series of lectures, I'll be looking at various examples of art to illustrate my points. However, if at any point I show you an example which is unfamiliar, then please tell me, as it is imperative that you be able to use your past experiences so that you can check to see if your ideas agree with mine. So if you have not seen a particular work of art before, then this will not work. And let me remind you now that at the end of these lectures, you will be given a written assignment which will consist of a 2,500-word critical essay. This is not an art review, but an analysis of what you think this kind of art means. Okay, so what is contemporary art? Well, My view is that contemporary art reflects a particular time in history. In terms of Western civilization, this is the period that became known as the Renaissance, which began roughly in 1450. But this becomes confusing as the modern era is also considered to be from 1789, from the time of the French Revolution. Added to this are modern ideas and modern art that developed from 1890. This period has also been called the turn of the century. To try and somehow bring all these periods together, I shall define contemporary art as any art created from 1920 up until the present day. Turning now to the question of whether or not art is useful for society. Well, when we look back at the history of the West, we can see that there has been a tradition, especially in Western Europe, of art that was official. This meant that the government sponsored or subsidized the art. It could be said, therefore, that art has a cultural use, in that it can represent both the culture and history of a country. And let's remember what I said earlier, that this is both the history and culture of a particular time. Now, the disadvantage of this kind of official art is that it tends to be academic. And by that, I mean it is art that requires the person looking at it to be educated in art, at least to some extent. So it seems to me that this restricts this type of art to a particular social group, and whether you agree with this concept or not will depend on if you believe that art should be accessible to everyone. Of course, with the rapid developments in technology and advertising, the television, computer, and various forms of digital media, art has changed, and although there will always be a need for art to be subsidized by governments, we see today art forms that are surviving on individual subsidy. Sometimes this is through the support of wealthy patrons, such as businessmen or famous people, but it also operates on a more simple level. I refer here to the art that is done on walls and in streets, sometimes called amateur art. But it is the art of graffiti, and it is now accepted as an art form in itself. So here we come to what I see as another advantage for society, in that art is a means by which people can express their ideas, their feelings. Of course, in the case of graffiti, there is much debate as to whether the advantages outweigh the more negative side, which is when graffiti artists paint on public buildings. This creates unnecessary expense and also damages these buildings, which are meant for public use. We will be looking at some examples of this later on. Now, many critics of contemporary art have pointed to art that is often violent and even obscene. But I would like to suggest that such art is not meant to only shock us. It also has the element of exposure, so it can teach us about the violence in society. This then brings us to another advantage of art. It can raise awareness, help us see things in a different light. The disadvantage of this is that art can be dangerous. What I'm saying here is that if we accept that contemporary art has the power to influence our feelings and attitudes, then we have to accept that art can evoke negative feelings like anger as much as it can give us feelings of hope and peace. But art is, after all, about us, so it can be about our beliefs and our behavior. And as human beings, we possess both positive and negative traits. I'd like to show you some slides now to illustrate what I've been talking about.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.